Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth of our special webinars this year on sustainability in lighting. I can't believe we've done 5 already. It's fantastic. Today's event is organised by Recolight, which is the UK's leading compliance body for the waste, electrical and electronic equipment regulations. I'm Graeme Molony. I'm the head of content at the Build Back Better Awards, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour and a half or so. Today, we're discussing how to extend the life of a luminaire with a special focus on reuse as opposed to recycling. Now, we have an excellent lineup of speakers. As you can see, our panel today are Graeme Vickery, who's the Senior Policy Officer with Producer Responsibility and Product Regulation at Defra. We have Tom Ruddle, who's the circular design engineer at Egg Lighting, and it's great to see job titles like that starting to pop up in the lighting industry. We have Simon Fisher, who's a well-known luminaire designer in the industry. He's the director of FMark. We have Nigel Harvey, who's the CEO of Recolight. Francesca Cameron, she's the collections development and membership coordinator at Recolight. And last but not least, we have Glenn Hildyard and Tony Stones, who are both directors of Coco Lighting. Let's look at today's agenda. So first we have Graeme, who will walk us through Defra's plans for both encouraging and incentivizing the reuse for a circular economy. Tom will look at all the compliance issues. It's very important that that's a key issue towards reuse. And he'll look at the whole issue of compliance and testing, certification and warranties and all that type of thing. And he'll be followed by Simon, who will unveil the Regen Initiative, which is a joint venture with Coco Lighting. So that's why we have Glenn and Tony around. They can answer any questions that you may have and expand on what they're doing. And after that, we have Nigel Harvey and Francesca Cameron, who are also doing some unveiling of their own. They're going to propose some new Recolight services with used and new but superseded luminaires. That will be very interesting to see what their plans are. Now, just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. Today is one of a series of webinars on this topic. And if you missed the ones earlier this year, we had them on legislation for lighting, the return of the replaceable lamp, how to go net zero. And the most recent one was Specifier's role in the circular economy. Now, you can listen to all of those on replay by going to the Recolight website, go to events, and then follow the links. And you'll be able to watch it and fast forward through and all the rest of it. And we've had some great speakers, really, and some really interesting topics. So I commend those to you. Now, in the same place, you can also register for the next upcoming webinars. The next one is on Thursday, the 28th of October, and it's a special on designing sustainable luminaires. It will look at how we can create products that are easier to remanufacture and reuse. So keep an eye for that. So that's recolight.co.uk. Excuse me. Right, today's session is being recorded and it will in due course appear on the Recolight website along with the others, and you can listen again at your leisure. Now, the webinar will be an hour and a half and we'll finish at 12:30 p.m. Now, if you have any questions, and you can put them in any time, please put the questions in the questions box, and chat or any queries, put those in the chat box. And I say this because I'm going to only be looking at the questions during the event. But my colleague Suzanne, behind the scenes here, she's taking care of the chat. So if you have any technical or other issues, put them in there and Suzanne will do her best to assist you. Now, I usually start these webinars with some news of sustainable and circular lighting from around the industry. Today is no exception. Now, there's a very active debate in European lighting industry at the moment about the standardization that's going to be needed to enable the replaceability requirements of the EU's Ecodesign regulations. Now, it's all part of the EU's move towards a circular economy and circular economy principles. And it's basically a form of return to the days of the old light bulb, the old replaceable light bulb that we knew and loved. Now, two key players in all this are, of course, the IEC and Zaga, and the debate is around how they can build on existing standards and conventions to create a new ecosystem of replaceable lamps, light sources, and drivers. Now, for instance, Zaga is currently getting its Book 14 lamp specifications adopted as an IEC standard, and one company, one German manufacturer, Green Gems, has already taken the initiative and developed a set of components based on existing and widely adopted IEC and Zaga platforms. So the idea is to make it easier for both luminaire makers and users to change both spotlights and linear lights using standard interoperable components. This example, you know that spot is a GH36D lamp holder with some modifications on it. But we're going to see lots of this, I think, over the coming years, and we're going to see, you know, standard. We coalesce around some standards that will make it, that will work for both manufacturers and for end users, so they can change lamps and gear both. We're using qualified people and also user changeable parts. In other news, Whitecroft has unveiled what it is calling a Vitality Relight service. Now, this is aimed at refurb projects rather than new build, and the idea behind it is that Whitecroft will survey clients' buildings and then suggest what they're terming selective interventions to regenerate that space, which could be new or upgraded lighting or controls. And two big brands this month have also announced that they're going carbon neutral. The first of these is Louis Poulsen. It says, by sourcing renewable electricity only for its main plant in Denmark. It has also introduced a take-back scheme, which will apply first to its iconic PH5 pendant, classic luminaire. So it's going to start in Denmark and then expand to the rest of Europe in the coming years. So we're starting to see this now, companies, you know, bringing in take-back services, and some of them money is changing hands, and they're giving people residual value, etc. So to keep luminaires in use and in life, in theory, forever. The company has also set itself a strategic target of using no aluminium or brass or copper in its luminaires going forward. Vela also announced this month that it too is going carbon neutral. The company says it has reduced its carbon emissions by 84% since 2008. It's also offsetting some of its emissions using a UK tree planting project. So that's the month's roundup of news in this sort of sustainability space in lighting. So let's get on to the business at hand. So I'm going to hand over to Graeme from Defra, who's going to talk about the government department's plans for encouraging and incentivizing the circular economy. Graeme.
Okay, Ray, thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks also to Recolight for organising the event today. As Ray said, my name's Graeme Vickery. I'm in Defra. My main responsibilities focus around the current WEEE regulations and our plans to reform the existing WEEE system over the coming years. I also have responsibility for the restriction of hazardous substances in electrical and electronic equipment regulations. Bit of a mouthful, but most of you, I'm sure, on the line will recognise that as ROS for short. So that's who I am. Let's crack on with the first slide. Thanks, Suzanne. So there we go. There's a few very happy people with lots and lots of electrical equipment. That photo, those suite of photographs were produced through a collaboration with the photographer Greg Seagull and Material Focus, who some of you will recognise as being the organisation that oversees the spend on the WEEE compliance fee. Now, what is interesting and maybe quite remarkable is that this suite of photographs are going to be used in the blue zone at COP26. The organisers of COP26 approached Material Focused and asked if they could be featured as part of the display in the blue zone, and the blue zone is the area where all the key negotiations are taking place. And I say remarkable because, of course, you know, a lot of the stuff that we've been looking at in the build up to COP26 has focused very much on the energy agenda around sort of decarbonisation of any energy supply, reducing demand for energy, etc. But of course, you know, our economy isn't just about energy. We rely on products. It's in the way we live our daily lives. And those products, of course, rely on material resources, notably metals, plastics, glass, all of which are used in your sector as well as others. And of course, you know, the efficiency with which we produce these products, how we use them and how we dispose of them at end of life has a material impact on the resources that we consume, and therefore the carbon footprint which evolves from the use of those materials and consumption of those products. So, you know, I started thinking then about, well, what is the link between the circular economy, which is all about efficient use of resources, and climate change? And came across this definition, which I'm not claiming any ownership of. It's actually a definition from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Circular economy is all about, as I think we understand, transforming the way we use resources. You know, let's say abandoning the concept of, let's call it the throwaway economy, to a place where, you know, resources are recirculated and nature is regenerated. And if we do this properly, then we're looking at tackling some of the very significant issues that we face globally, which you know, the leaders at COP26 will be looking to address. But not only does linking the circular economy and climate change together obviously reduce carbon impact, it brings potentially growth in terms of jobs, in terms of economy, and resilience. So for me, that's perhaps the sort of starting point for the sort of conversations that might follow through the day. Let's just move on, because I've had a stab at what I think this might mean for the lighting sector. Before we get into that, just some data in there around some of the challenges that we're facing. Yeah. So putting COVID aside, if we look back to 2019, through the re-regulations, we were recycling somewhere in the region of 900 kilotons of waste electricals. I know it's you know, there are risks around looking at that as a comparison to what's placed on the market, but nevertheless, it represented about 50% of what was purchased, which does suggest that you know, there is scope for improvement. Of course, if you dig a bit deeper, you see that you know, collection rates vary from category to category, and I've given some indications there as to what those variations look like. In many ways, it's encouraging that the lamp sector are managing a return rate of 44%, which, given the size of many of those products and the ease with which they can simply be disposed of in a skip or in a bin, perhaps is testament to, you know, the work that Recolight have done as the leading lamp and luminaire PCS in trying to get as much out of the system as they can. But I think it does indicate the scope and the challenge that we've got ahead. And the final slide, the final point there just underlines that point. Recent research suggests that, you know, certainly householders are throwing away something like 155 kilotons of WEEE a year in the bin. I'm not sure what that figure is for the non-household sector, but it is clearly going to be significant. So, you know, I then started thinking about, well, what is the potential prize for the sector here if we're going to work collectively to raise our game, both, you know, within industry and within government. And I've just thrown together a few statistics there, just to sort of, I think, indicate, you know, what the size of the prize is. I guess the key point that I'm sort of I zoom in on when I see this is that only 7% of electrical equipment appears to be sort of currently reused. But then when you contrast that with the huge amount of equipment that we have in our homes, and research that suggests that you know, a significant amount of the stuff that we end up throwing away could conceivably be reused. It illustrates, you know, the size of the task ahead, but also potentially the sort of value of the prize when you know, we look at a figure that says something like 160 million, you know, is the resale value of the, you know, electrical equipment that we have in our homes, and a figure of 34 million in relation to business e-waste. I would draw your attention to a WRAP study. Forgive me, I haven't actually put the link to that study in my slide set, but would encourage you to take a look at it, because it does set out, it focuses on a number of sectors where the prize from a WRAP appears to be significant, and the electrical and electronic sector is one of those sectors. So I would encourage you to look at that WRAP study. It was produced only this year. Let's just move on. So I then started thinking about, and you know, I'm prepared to be told by experts that I've got this wrong, but I then started thinking about, well, you know, in relation to the circular economy, you know, what does this mean for the lighting sector? I suppose what I'm saying here could be applied to any sector, but I think it's worth just reminding ourselves that, you know, if we're going to drive up levels of reuse, if we're going to keep product in life longer, if we're going to effectively sort of sweat the material resources that are embedded in our products, ultimately it all comes down to product design, I guess, as the starting point, but also looking at developing new business models where perhaps the model that we have at the moment around ownership and consumption needs to be revisited with a view to moving towards business models around service provision and leasing a product rather than simply straight sales. And then, you know, in the context of today, where we're talking about the you know, the circular economy, you know, that raises a question in my mind as to whether in future we should be congratulating ourselves for recycling products, or whether we should actually in future see recycling as the bottom of the waste hierarchy, as opposed to be something to be particularly proud of. So there's food for thought. Turning to kind of what the government is doing, which is clearly what I was asked to sort of talk about. I'm not going to go into any great depth on any of these subjects, and I'm an expert only on the last of those subjects. But the government consulted on its waste prevention programme earlier this year, and will be publishing the final version of that very soon. That is an important strategic document that effectively pulls together the whole host of actions and activities that the government is doing around the space of waste prevention. Now, obviously, a sector that's you guys would be very familiar with is, of course, the Ecodesign regulations, which in the past have focused obviously on addressing energy consumption impacts, but increasingly now, as new regulations come forward, will also have minimum requirements in there for resource efficiency, looking at issues around product durability and product lifetimes. I'm not going to go into any great depth here, because I'm sure that there are other people in the audience who are far more well placed to talk on the detail of eco-design than I am. But something else that the government published earlier in the year, that Defra published earlier in the year, that again signifies, you know, the government's commitment to looking at the issue of, you know, resource efficiency, is a strategy on government estate procurement, which focuses on electronic equipment, and amongst other things is in future looking to put a far greater emphasis on impacts around carbon emissions and resilience, and of course part of that is around the design and future durability of the products, services that the government is looking to procure. The Environment Bill, well, that's been rattling around for, I don't know, must be a couple of years now. We are very close to that bill becoming an act. Contains a whole host of new measures to address environmental issues. But I suppose if I was going to pick one issue that is relevant to the webinar today, it would be the one where we're looking at, well, the bill will provide powers for the government to introduce new information requirements for consumers around durability, repairability and recyclability of products that are placed on the UK market in the future. And of course, the final point there, we are looking to reform the existing WEEE regulations, which as they stand at present, pretty much are all about you know, looking to minimize the amount of stuff that ends up going to landfill and looking to drive more waste up the waste hierarchy, primarily focusing around recycling. Now, if we turn to the final slide that I've got today, I've just indicated some of the areas that we're looking to address through through our review of the existing regulations. I mean, of course it is true that the current regulations place a requirement on producer compliance schemes to respect the waste hierarchy and specifically to promote reuse of waste equipment over recycling. And it's great that you know, being here today, you know, Recolight are taking a sort of leadership role, really, in you know, looking at that and thinking, what else can we do? But just briefly summarising the things that, you know, we're looking at in the context of the review, we would certainly be looking to reward compliance schemes who are doing more in the reuse space. Now, that could be around providing, you know, giving a greater weighting to the evidence that PCSs receive to demonstrate the extent to which they've met targets, or indeed it could look at, you know, potentially introducing separate reuse and recycling targets into future legislation. If we went down that route, obviously need to be thinking carefully about where those targets should be placed, whether they should sit with compliance schemes, whether they should sit elsewhere. But that's all issues that we would want to tease out through the consultation. The other thing that we want to do is, you know, to effectively, you know, reduce the amount of stuff that goes to household waste sites, and encourage more material to be collected through retail take back. We certainly know that, you know, with larger items, you know, domestic appliances, we know that stuff that goes back via the retail route lends itself more readily to reuse, and we're looking at other measures that we can do, introduce to encourage more material to go back via that kind of route. When I say retailers, clearly I'm not just talking here about high street retailers, I'm also talking about companies that supply over the internet. I mentioned you know, earlier on, you know, if we're going to embrace circular economy, an area that needs to be explored is circular economy business models. So again, in the WEEE regulations in the future, looking at how we can reward or incentivize those businesses that adopt those kind of models. And finally, the last point that we want to look at is the concept of eco-modulation. It's something that anybody who's around the area of producer responsibility and concept would be familiar with. But again, it's largely around providing the right incentives and rewards for those companies that are producing better products that, let's say, embrace the concept behind the circular economy and would drive us towards that circular economy that you know, we're all committed to working towards. So I think that's me done. So that being the case, I will now hand over to Tom Ruddle, who is a circular design engineer at EGG.
Hello, thank you, Graeme. Yeah, really interesting to see Defra's thoughts on that. So yeah, I'm going to be speaking very briefly about compliance for reuse and remanufacture. And it is a little bit of a dry topic, but I think I'm going to try and persuade you all that it's of crucial importance, and it's not a roadblock, it's a challenge we can overcome. So without further ado, so hello, I'm Tom. I'm actually a lead remanufacture engineer, and I work at EGG Lighting. We're based in Glasgow. We're an SME, and we provide commercial lighting and electrical services. And I think I think probably commercial lighting lends itself best primarily to reuse and remanufacture, just because of larger quantities of similar lighting in a system, and greater amounts of mass per luminaire. Next slide, please. So just before I get into it, I'm just going to go over a term. So I think everyone's getting very familiar with the concept of remanufacture. It's not a new word at all, and it does have a degree of specificity about it. So it's not repair, it's not the same as reuse, it's not refurbishment. So remanufacture is generally defined as to bring a used product back to at least its original performance. And in the context of lighting, that's probably better than original performance. And with a warranty at least equal to that as new. And obviously in reuse or remanufacture, we need to make sure that all the same legislation applies to a reused or remanufactured product. And I think everyone probably knows what those pieces of legislation are, but we'll go through them briefly. And I'm going to try and make the case that remanufacture is the appropriate technique as part of the circular economy. And that's partly because of the way that it can help us meet safety requirements, performance requirements, and compliance. And also because it puts onus on upgrading components rather than just replacing them, as you might expect with repair or refurbishment. And also that question of a full warranty, we'll get onto that again, but that's a reflection of the diligence of the process, and obviously critically it can help us reduce embodied emissions. So next slide, please. So very quickly through this, so the simplified process of remanufacture is you start with a used product, wherever that may have come from. It might not have ever been used, actually. It might be ex-stock, or it might be more heavily used. And then at that point, there's preparation, there's thought going into this, and planning, re-engineering. And this is where compliance starts being a consideration. Compliance isn't tacked on to the end of remanufacture, but it's considered right from the very start. And then there's the kind of operational part of the process, where components are going to be removed, potentially new components added, maybe modifications to the luminaire, before sort of documentation, final labeling and testing, before a product is determined appropriate to be placed back onto the market. So next slide, please. Now, just a kind of brief summary here. What we want to avoid is this situation at the top where we've got a wonderful sustainable product, but we've got no documentation and we probably don't know if it's going to meet any legislation. So compliance is essential in the circular economy with reuse and remanufacture, and there's a legal burden on all remanufacturers and people involved in this space. And the key thing is obviously a UKCA mark, the replacement for the CE mark, and any modification to a luminaire is going to need a new assessment, a new declaration of conformity. I'm not going to prescribe to you in this how exactly that is done, but it does need to be done. And it needs to be supported by evidence and a technical construction file. And all of this needs to be thought of at the planning stage of remanufacture. So what we typically do is when we're looking at a luminaire, we'd start thinking which pieces of legislation and standards the luminaire would need to be assessed against, how we're going to do that, and what sort of testing we would need to carry out. And obviously the most important standard that we're all aware of, I think, is BS 60598, the luminaire's construction standard. And it's worth noting that there are notes in the standard which a remanufacturer or even someone preparing luminaires for reuse probably won't be able to conduct word for word. And that doesn't mean that that luminaire is unsafe or non-compliant, but it does mean that we need to take an intelligent approach towards meeting the requirements of the standard. So, you know, if we're working in a smaller batch size and we're trying not to destroy products because we actually want to reuse them, then we need to take different approaches. So, for example, using pre-compliant systems and components, or combinations of components that have been assessed more carefully. And obviously, while we're on a Recolight conference, you know, it's very clear that WEEE compliance needs to be achieved during the process. So any components that come out of the light that are waste electronic need to be treated in compliance with the WEEE regulations. Next slide, please. So digging a little bit into reuse, you know, if this is a product which all of this depends very much on the context of the product, where it's come from, what condition it's in, and those are all decisions that need to be made and documented and risk assessed. So if a product is brand new, it's not been taken out of the packaging, you know, such questions like, is there any evidence of impact to the packaging? Is the packaging, you know, visibly water damaged or heavily dusty? Are there any age sensitive components? And if there are batteries in the component, in the luminaire, you know, will it be safe or appropriate to place those batteries back on the market? And I think, again, it depends on the situation, but it's almost always going to be the case that the person placing the reused product on the market will need to take responsibility for compliance for the product, because the original manufacturer may not support that, uphold it, and the same for warranty. And in order to do that, in order to place a compliant product on the market, as I've just said, you know, the product needs to be reassessed, it needs to be documented and relabeled, and as part of that, PAT testing, etc. So remanufacture, the difference there is that there's been a substantial modification to the product. So for example, the light source might have been replaced or upgraded, control gear might have been modified, wiring, or some material damage to the product has been remediated. And obviously all of this needs to be carried out by trained, competent personnel. It's an industrial process, really. But in terms of compliance, obviously that's very clearly invalidated the manufacturer's original declaration of conformity. And again, to reiterate, the compliance strategy needs to be carried out relative to the modifications that have been done to the luminaire. So, for example, if a luminaire was originally a 10-watt luminaire and it's been remanufactured with a light source which is going to create more heat than the original, then the onus on thermal testing would be very important, because that luminaire wasn't designed for that purpose. So again, all of this needs to be done in conjunction with careful documentation in the technical construction file, and a record of work should be conducted. And we would recommend that this is documented per individual unit, not just for a batch, just because of the variation in remanufacture. And I think, again, at a larger volume, so we typically work at a batch size of between 50 to 150 luminaires, and the greater the batch size, the more comprehensive the test method, I think, is appropriate. And if there's a very serious deviation from the original design, then, or there's any issues that are thrown up during testing, then that justifies a deeper dive into whether that product is safe and fully compliant. Moving forwards, so Ecodesign this is a relatively new requirement, is that manufacturers shall ensure that light sources and separate control gears can be replaced with the use of commonly available tools. Now, a reused or remanufactured product is no different, and it is possible to make a technical justification for why that's not the case. But I think particularly in the case of a remanufactured product, we should be taking the same level of seriousness to make sure that that product can be upgraded either by an end user or by a remanufacturer down the line. Next slide, please. So just to touch briefly onto WEEE compliance, there's a remanufacturing site or a reuse site needs to have the correct waste management licensing registration. Now, depending on what's being done, that might be an exemption, but nevertheless, it needs to be correct, and that will be lodged with the EA, SEPA, or the NIEA as appropriate. And a little bit of a technicality, but if a luminaire is collected with the expectation of being reused or remanufactured, that process is kind of termed in the WEEE directive as being prepared for reuse. And in that case, it can be classified as used electronic or electrical equipment rather than waste. And that does have some legislative impact. But obviously, any waste that arises during the remanufacture process needs to be treated with exactly the same duty of care as whether it arrives on site or at the facility. Next slide, please. So this is something that I think is probably new to the majority of people on the call. So around February of this year, we started talking to the BSI about a standard BS 8887. And what this standard, the history of this standard is from a number of different industries, but particularly automotive and IT. And it's helped those industries communicate a shared terminology and agreed a process, very, very general process, but it gives us the key steps of remanufacture so that everyone in the industry is on the same page about what it is and what it isn't. And just some figures up on the screen there. So you can see this is by the European Remanufacturing Network in 2015. And there's 7,204 firms who operate in remanufacture across the EU, and 192,000 people employed in that sector. And just as a question really is, where does lighting see itself in 10 years or in 15 years in remanufacture? And I think, so we're continuing to work on this, and in fact, a number of others on this call are as well. So we hope that that can add a little bit more confidence to be that to customers, be that to remanufacturers or manufacturers as well, as to the remanufacture of used products. Next slide, please. So I've put RED and EMC on the same page just because they're a little bit more challenging to test to in a low volume situation as you might have with reuse or remanufacture. And so with the Radio Equipment Directive, I think what the approach that we've taken is to base compliance on the component declaration. But we would be very cautious as to whether that is appropriate for a reused component. And I think this is probably an area that more study into is required. With EMC, the test facilities that are required to test EMC compliance are very significant. It's not something that most organizations have in-house, and it is, to be honest, prohibitively expensive for a small batch, even up to 500 lights. So the best way there is really, I would recommend to base compliance on pre-assessed combinations of components, and that gets us at least 90% there in terms of the requirements.
Just a polite time reminder.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. I've got a clock up. So warranty isn't about compliance, but it is about giving confidence to everyone involved. And the reason it's really important for remanufacture is because it conveys the diligence that's been done in the process. So, you've not just picked up some LEDs which look about right. You've got no idea where they came from or whether they work, and slapped them in. That's not what remanufacture is about. And warranty is a way of communicating that to all parties. Of key importance, though, is to ensure that no original labeling, perhaps from the previous manufacturer, would be left on a product, if that could give rise to confusion to the end customer as to who is responsible for compliance and warranty. So that's important to take action on. And I think final slide. So yeah, just some final comments. Again, compliance starts at the design stage and it moves all the way through the reuse and remanufacture process. It's not the same as repair, it's not refurbishment, and it's not fixing. And it's as much about process as product. Compliance is something that we can achieve for reused and remanufactured products in the circular economy, but it will require a bit of a rethink in some places. But the end goal is that we need to make good quality products which meet performance expectations with a new warranty, and doing so as sustainably as possible, so that the client doesn't compromise on any basis. And I'll leave you there. So this is a product that we've recently remanufactured for a local authority in Scotland. Thank you. So I am going to hand over to Simon, I think, as well as Glenn and Tony, and they're going to talk about the Regen Initiative.
Thanks, Tom. Great overview of some of the challenges we face with regards to developing a new industry that will be associated to lighting, and the Regen Initiative is something that we've developed, and I suppose this is the launch of, and it's an initiative that the plan is to create scalable circular solutions for the lighting industry. So the kind of the executive summary associated to that is we want to be able to offer a lighting fixture refurbishment business, breathing new life into projects, and that's maybe a key differentiator to some of the activities that individual lighting OEMs are doing at the moment, which, by the way, should all be applauded. And there is no such thing as sort of a wrong step or an incorrect step towards remanufacture of lighting fixtures. But the idea of the Regen Initiative is to look at this at a project basis, and working with end users, embracing and engaging with OEMs on specific projects, but to be able to kind of be the umbrella that creates a project by project delivery, so that an end user is then not expecting to engage maybe with 5, 6, 7 individual OEMs to find out what their individual remanufacturing processes might be. And in addition to quantifying sort of the capital value of the remanufacture process. We're also working with Net Zero International. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides, but we're really going to try and capture what the environmental benefits of the remanufacturing process are on a project by project basis as well. So quite interestingly, we sat and developed this initiative with Cocoa Lighting. I'll bring Glenn on board in a second to mention, just say a few specific words about the projects on the screen. But what's quite interesting is when we started to discuss a remanufacturing process, then we sort of found out that Cocoa already had a re-engineering process, and they already ran projects where they looked at fixtures and redeveloped fixtures. So Glenn, I don't know whether you just want to come in and say a few words about these projects.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Simon. And thank you to Tom for a fantastic presentation, obviously surrounding compliance. Yes, good morning, everybody. My name's Glenn Hildyard from Cocoa Lighting. A brief introduction, if I may, for those that are not familiar with what we do, independently of the new Regen Initiative. We are a lighting services stroke solutions provider for the lighting fraternity. Established 20 years ago, we offer a host of lighting services to the OEM market. Of the many services we offer, emergency lighting conversions, for which we are better known, accounts for the majority of our business, and product modifications and refurbishment is a service that we've been providing to the industry for many years, as Simon just mentioned. So I'm here today just to briefly make a few comments on the 3 projects listed on this slide. And this is basically just to highlight some of our recent refurbishment activities. These projects are chosen at random, by the way, and the different ways in which these land with us, really. So project 1 on the left-hand side was brought to us by a refurbishment company. They were invited onto a project to upgrade many aspects of the space, including the lighting. And here we're taking an old 2x18 watt compact fluorescent product with louver and converting to LED with a new opal diffuser. And as part of our processes, similar to what Tom touched on earlier, we would assess the fitting first, and then we would design a modification, source the parts to create a sample solution. And then our next step would be to test the product for electrical safety under the guidance of 60598 and run photometric tests prior to submitting for approval. Project 2 in the centre, again, arrived with us via a small independent electrical contractor. Again, they wanted to keep the architecture of the product itself, but upgrade to a more modern lighting solution. You'll see this one's quite an industrial style fitting, highly IP rated. The fitting had to remain in situ on site as well, so that was another challenge. So in this case, we just took one sample back from site and would build a new gear tray with diffused LEDs. The design and test process would be as before, clearly not photometrically testing. Well, actually on this one, we did do a photometric test as well to prove compliance as well. Project 3 on the right-hand side, this project came to us via the actual OEM of the product. They had a 20-year-old luminaire installed on a project. The end client contacted them directly to discuss options, and through discussion, it was deemed that the best option for the client on this occasion was to upgrade the product. Again, the fittings had to remain in situ, so we had one sample back from site. We designed and manufactured an on-site retrofit gear tray with LEDs and driver, again, all tested prior to going out for compliance. And just quickly, I know we're pushed for time, on another project which is not listed here, but important, I think, to mention. We're currently talking to an OEM who 18 months ago supplied some 400 pieces of trunking mounted linear products for a Cat A fit out. And like all these projects, 18 months on, the incumbent tenant wants a completely different lighting scheme. So a contractor was appointed, gets to work, starts to take out the fittings, but then makes contact with the OEM and asks the question, would you like the opportunity to collect these fittings from site and perhaps somehow repurpose them on another project? fantastic. That's, you know, that's what we're looking for. But the end of the conversation was, otherwise, if you don't, we'll just skip them. So a bit of a bittersweet message, really. Luckily, on this occasion, the OEM engaged with them and prevented 400 or so products going on a completely different journey. So well done to the contractor for making that call, and obviously for the OEM for engaging with them. So I think the purpose of these webinars highlighting these initiatives is basically to try and demonstrate that whilst it's not for every project for sure, there are options available for all parties to have a circular, inclusive approach. So that's me done for this little slide. Thank you. I'll pass you back to Simon, who will continue his presentation on the Regen Initiative. Thank you.
Thanks, Graeme.
Thank you.
Yeah, as you can see, this stuff exists, right? The projects and the opportunities already exist. And as a product design consultancy, you know, we're working with OEMs to deliver scalable solutions already. This was back in 2015 with Havel Sylvania, and this for a major retailer, which included keeping a lot of infrastructure and space in place, but delivering new lighting and effectively disposing of the products that we replaced. So in terms of the Regen Initiative itself, next slide, please, Suzanne. Then FMARC are going to do what they do best and provide product design capability, feasibility studies at project level, understand what can be achieved, and then working with Coco, we'll identify the process of remanufacture, and then actually drive through that manufacturing process, the testing and certification that Tom alluded to, and I'm delighted to be working with Tom and collaborating on the working group to build the 887, BS 887 standard. And then, yeah, finally to work with Net Zero to really quantify the environmental benefits of doing this process. As a end user, you've got to have confidence in the solution that's being provided. You know, both Coco and FMARC are members of the LIA. Hopefully that means something to you guys. But certainly when we look at the certification involved in the product process, you know, Tom alluded to that quite heavily, but a lot of the equipment and the machinery is already within Coco to undertake that testing capability. It's all certified via the LIA Lab initiative. Forgive me, Tony, just in the interest of time, I'm just going to continue on and try and bring this a little bit closer on track. So apologies for you not getting your moment in the sun, but we're just covering off the fact that as product designers, we can simulate the photometric, the thermal characteristics, and then we can validate through the manufacturing process and the testing process to make sure that whatever is redelivered back to site in a remanufactured state is competent and is compliant and is fit for purpose. And from the environmental benefits perspective, then Net Zero are going to produce a basic report for us. So they're going to receive some data from us in terms of what the project entails. They're going to convert that into carbon emissions, and then they're going to report the carbon savings. And that kind of report will be quite a basic report and have some quite high level analysis, like this is the amount of cars we've taken off the road, or this is the amount of trees that we have, you know, we have planted. But moving forwards and in engagement with the end user on the project, then we can really scale that reporting into something that can then be used as through, you know, to embrace the sustainability statements that each of the end users have. So it can become a really powerful tool when we look at the environmental benefits of the project. And I think that is a wrap from our side. If you want to find out more, the slide deck will go out. The YouTube will be up. You can contact Coco to find out more about the Regen Initiative. It's a pleasure to communicate to you, and I will hand over to Nigel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon, and really good to hear what you guys are doing at Regen. It's fantastic. What I'd like to move on now to do is to talk about what Recolight are trying to do to try to avoid unnecessary recycling in the lighting industry. And it's a bit strange because Recolight, as most people are aware, are a recycling organisation, and yet we're looking to do something other than recycling. So if we could move forward to the next slide, please. As Graeme has alluded to already, there's this concept of a waste hierarchy, and the most favoured approach is simply to reduce the amount of waste that actually arises. And recycling is halfway down there, but well above recycling is reuse. So what we're trying to do is to reduce the amount of recycling, but increase the amount of reuse that's taking place. And so we've identified two opportunities for the lighting industry to address this. And it's all about avoiding waste, reducing recycling, stimulating reuse, and ultimately responding to the climate emergency, because that is something that's going to affect all of us in very profound ways. So those two opportunities are about either the reuse of used lighting equipment, which is still in good condition when it gets taken out, and also making surplus brand new lighting equipment that's still in stock available for supply. So the new services we are announcing and looking to further develop and enhance are covering those two areas: used lighting and surplus new lighting. And I'll cover the used lighting section, and then my colleague Francesca Cameron will talk about the surplus new lighting. So to give a bit of context, Recolight collects and recycles well in excess of 1,000 tonnes of non-household, that's business light fittings per year. Well in excess of 1,000 tonnes, we're talking hundreds of thousands of fittings, many fluorescents, so few LEDs are already coming through. Many are the result of large-scale projects. So one of our members will be supplying new product to a major retailer, major hospitality, bank, etc. A large number of usually identical fittings will be removed at the same time. And the sad truth is that currently virtually none are reused. And yet some are in very good condition before they're removed. But sadly, much of the value is destroyed by recycling. And it's simply that, that the embedded carbon of a used fitting is significant. But if all you do is chop it up into little bits and then separate it out into the plastics, the metals and other components, that value is much lower. And just to give an example, an iPhone has a material value of between £1 and £2, the product inside there, and yet clearly a second-hand iPhone has far more value if it's sold and put to use again. So the question is, can we change that? And it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be easy. We're really opening this up and encouraging others to discuss with us. So next slide, please. So what is the solution we're looking at? First of all, we've got, as I mentioned, many large-scale projects. So a Recolight member will come to us and say, we're doing 10 bank branches, or we're doing 50 retail branches. And we then engage with them and start the process of arranging for collection. So what we'd like to do is to get more data on the product that is being removed during those projects, and ideally information regarding brand, model, rating, etc., photographs. Often the salesperson going into a site will have an opportunity to have a look at this, and we'll see what's coming out. We just love to have more information. We then need to identify those that might be reusable, and as Tom mentioned, scale is important, so we think probably a minimum of 100 to 200 identical fittings, but we've been in projects where there's been many thousands of identical fittings being removed. We then would want to provide some of that key data to potential remanufacturers, and that would include the original producer. So let's say of those many thousands coming out, 2,000 or 1,000 are brand X. Even if brand X are not a Recolight member, we'd like to contact brand X and say, look, these are coming out. Would you be interested in receiving them? Because almost certainly the original manufacturer is the best placed organization to have a good shot at remanufacturing that product. So the fittings, once we've identified them, we've identified the remanufacturer, we arrange for delivery of them on a free of charge basis to the manufacturer in the UK. So they receive them free of charge, so they've got the opportunity to generate value out of them. They then take ownership and responsibility for the product thereafter, including compliance. So what are the critical success factors? They're significant, and obviously support from stakeholders in the process, the new supplier, the contractor, the original owner, and the remanufacturer is all critical. And getting that good and timely data is important as well, because without that, it's very hard for the remanufacturing organization to look at a product and to decide, whether they think it's that there's an opportunity there. And in truth, we're going to need to grow a lighting remanufacturing sector. We've had some examples of organizations speaking already today, cocoa and egg, that's fantastic. But actually this needs to grow if we're going to get remanufacturing really making a difference. The careful handling of product is absolutely crucial, particularly because contractors tend to be paid on a per fitting remove basis. And so we're effectively going to be asking them to use a screwdriver rather than a hammer to remove product. We'll supply cardboard bubble wrap to make sure that they're wrapped carefully. But a real question for us is, how do we encourage contractors to do this in the right way? Clearly, the compliance of remanufactured product is important. It was great to hear what Tom said about the compliance process. And importantly, the commercials have to work. This has to work for all the different organizations in the supply chain. Everyone's got to be able to make a buck, frankly. But at the same time, we also need to eliminate any perverse incentives and be alive to and aware of those. And finally, buyers need to be willing to consider remanufactured product. Next slide. So drivers, obviously commercials we've talked about already. Shareholder and customer pressure may becoming increasingly important. Graeme's already talked about regulatory incentives that may encourage us all to do more reuse, but also good and bad PR is quite important. I think a number of us may be aware of the difficulties Amazon got in not that long ago when they were found to have been recycling and destroying large quantities of product rather than attempting to reuse it. Next slide, please. So is this an impossible task? I asked myself as I prepared the slides that you've just seen, because there is a mindset change that's going to be needed, not least in ourselves as a recycling organization. We need to change our KPIs and how we operate. And it will probably only work in a minority of cases, because it will always be challenging to make everything work for reuse in all situations. And we as an organization, we're going to make mistakes, we will learn, but we'd love to hear from others, and we'd love to get more engaged and more engagement in trying to make this happen. And goodwill and support from all the different sectors of our industry is going to be so vital. Next slide, please. So how are we going to make it happen? We're hoping to start off trials fairly soon. We'd love to have further discussions with stakeholders and specifiers, end users, producers. And we're going to seek to review every new project coming into our system for suitability for reuse now. We'd love to hear from companies willing to remanufacture product or willing to consider remanufacturing product, because it is actually a significant change, but I think it's a significant change that there's an opportunity that will grow over the coming years as we get encouraged collectively to do this. So please do contact us if you fall into that area. Please also contact us if, as an organization, you'd be willing to consider receiving back your own brand fittings as well, because as I say, for brand X, fittings is almost always going to be brand X, the producer, was the best place to remanufacture. And specifiers have a great opportunity to educate their clients to adopt more circular projects and to encourage the reuse of product. It's going to be a change in mindset, but it really could make a difference. And so I'd encourage people to either contact me directly, nigel.harvey@recolight.co.uk, or we've got that email address there, re-use@recolight.co.uk. Tell us, if you want to get involved in this conversation, we'd love to speak to you. Next slide, please. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Francesca Cameron. Sorry, Fran, over to you.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Nigel. So we're calling our second service Surplus New Lighting, and this targets discontinued lines and unused stock. A number of manufacturers hold unsold stock, and this takes up valuable space within their warehouses. And sometimes the decision to actually discard this unsold stock is often made at short notice. So we want to help to find a solution, and as quickly as possible. Key principles. The key principles of our service are to make it as easy as possible for a manufacturer or donor to hand over new lighting equipment that they no longer will be offering for sale. This could take various forms. It could be ex-demonstration stock, unsold stock, returned stock, but in as new condition. We also need to take into consideration the recipients. So we want to make it as easy as possible for a third-party company or recipient to receive these products, so that they can be offered for sale or actually be put into service. An additional key principle is that we want to avoid unnecessary recycling and waste. Manufacturers will need to confirm that they can actually demonstrate a donated product is compliant. All product quantities will be considered, as we understand that can be a variant. So the Recolight solution. The Recolight solution. Recolight seek to match unsold stock with potential recipients. So we want to collect new stock free of charge from our producer members or donors. There will be a few things that we do ask them to do though. So we'll ask them to provide as much information as they possibly can about the products they have. And we'll ask them to actually upload that information to our online inventory portal app. The donor will need to, at that point, confirm that to the best of their knowledge and without liability, as that is key, that the product is compliant with the required standards and legislation that existed at the point where the product was initially placed on the market. At this stage, we'll ask the manufacturer to palletize the stock that they have ready for collection. There may be cases where we can't find a recipient instantly, and we're aware that that will be a possibility in cases. So Recolight will actually store the stock free of charge that our members have provided to us, that we feel obviously can then go on to another home. Organisations and recipients may request stock via the inventory portal app that I mentioned earlier. And at that point that they do request the stock, we will ask them to take full responsibility for the compliance and the warranties based in part on the donor's original declaration. We will then ask them to pay for the transport to their site. So it raises the question, how are we going to make this all happen? So the service will only be available to Recolight producer members, and they will be given access to our online inventory portal where they can upload all the information they hold for the products. Potential recipients will also be given access to the portal to view products and see the availability of quantities, etc. In order to receive products, a recipient will need to accept our terms and conditions. These will include a statement that accepts responsibility for compliance and warranties, based in part on the donor's original declaration. Details of this app will be shared amongst our producer members and also potential recipients as and when required. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you on behalf of Nigel and I. The information that we've provided, we know that there's a lot to it, and we'd be happy for questions afterwards. If for any reason you do forget a question that you have or it's not able to be answered, please feel free to email us at re-use@recolight.co.uk. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Francesca. Excellent presentation. Right, I'd like to invite everybody to put your mics on and get your cameras on, and we can dive into some of this in more detail. So that's it. We've got a first question, which actually raises quite an interesting issue, which is the whole economics of this. And often we don't talk about money on these. Webinars, but I think we need to. I think that's something we need to talk about. And Kevin Shaw, who's leading lighting designer, raises this. He says, it worries me that the potential cost of compliance will make remanufacture uneconomic for lower value fittings, such as 600 by 600 backlit panels that form the largest volume of fittings currently in use. How can we make a cost-based case for remanufacture of these mass products? So I'll come to you first, Tom, and then then Tony and Glenn, and you as manufacturers. So are panels really ruled out of this?
Yeah, I'll try and make a couple of points here, and hopefully the other Tom Ruddle on the panel will agree with me. So what we've got a rule of thumb at the moment, which is that so we compare the remanufactured product to its new equivalent, and that's a little bit of a difficult thing to do anyway, but we do our best. So what we're trying to aim for is that the remanufactured cost to the client lays somewhere between 30 and 40% cheaper than the as new equivalent. And I think at this stage in the maturity of remanufacturing the lighting industry, that helps send a communication to customers. That said, clearly, I do agree with Kevin that if it's a cheap product, it will have been put together as quickly as possible. And we all know what these products are that we're talking about. They're not good quality. Ultimately, they're not a great product holistically, but they certainly don't support reuse or remanufacture. They were never designed to be taken apart or upgraded. So I think we should be asking ourselves questions such as, do we actually want to be putting these back on the market anyway? Do we want to be putting them on the market in the first place? But certainly, do we want to be putting them back on the market? And in a number of cases, you can't remanufacture a panel for the cost of some of the ones that are going on the market in the first place. But one saving grace of that is that when we use the SIBC TM65 methodology, which is basically fantastic really for what we want to do to assess the environmental benefit of remanufacture. And for these very lightweight, kind of flimsy edge lit panels, for example, the environmental benefit of remanufacture is much less than other fittings. So there's a bit of a saving grace that yes, they're manufactured in massive quantities, but in some ways it's a bad situation. But I don't think we should beat ourselves up that it doesn't work economically. We should just be emphasizing life cycle costing and getting good quality products put in the first place.
Tony, if I could bring you in on this.
Yes, I just want to, I'll just throw some weight behind what Tom just said there as well, which is not every product will be commercially viable. We have an array of products in the marketplace, which, as Tom said, are very cost effective at the point of sale back in the day. But going forwards, these things, after assessment, many of these things won't be commercially viable. And at that point, you just feed that information back to the client and just say, on this occasion, we don't think it's the right thing to do. It's not the right thing for our circular economy, as it were. And then the client can make a decision as to how they want to proceed, whether they look at alternative solutions, such as replacing the product with a new energy efficient option.
Okay. Without revealing any sort of, company secrets or your internal balance sheets, is this a profitable business? And are we going to have a lot of entrants coming into this and making their margins and working away?
Yeah, so it is profitable, but as we've mentioned earlier, it is all about your risk assessment, your primary assessment on the product to make sure that it's there is a viability to it. There are many products in the marketplace which are incredibly ornate. They're very robust. They were very, very well engineered back in the day of inception. So when they went to the markets, they were good, solid products, lots of metal in them, and definitely not flat panels. And these products, they are very viable, and there are many solutions that both Tom and Cocoa Lighting have been providing, many solutions that offer energy efficient options in line with the circular economy, as we've all been talking today. But again, I wouldn't say 100% of everything out there that's going to come our way is going to be profitable. But it's a journey that we're all starting to see what works and what doesn't work. And we want to start this journey now. We will evaluate everything. And sometimes you've got to look at something and just say, you know what, it's the right thing to do. We'll try and give this, we'll try and do some modifications and re-engineering, making sure it's compliant, give the client some satisfaction that they've got some points towards their recycling.
Yeah. So, Tom, you'd concur with that, I presume. Oh, Simon.
Yeah.
Simon.
I'll just
take Tom first, and then we could see Simon.
Okay, no.
I'll just put a one line in there. I completely agree with what Tony says. I think particularly because of the relative immaturity of remanufacture and reuse in lighting, fair pricing and transparency is going to be critical to success. And because it's a little bit new in some ways and it's old in other ways, customers really will be interested to know more than they might for a new light. But it is profitable in some cases. It's not economically viable in others, but it's certainly never a money tree. I think that's clear to say at the outset.
Simon?
Yeah, and for me, this just speaks to the fact that feasibility on a project by project basis is the thing that's going to be really important to understand quickly whether there is an opportunity or there isn't an opportunity to help on on that particular project. And the kind of the conversations I was having prior to kind of launching or conceiving really Regen was with some end users and specifiers, and it seemed to be that the golden line was actually, if it's not more expensive than buying new light fittings, then it would be a consideration. We'd be talking to lighting designers, and the attitude of their clients. Then actually, I was pleasantly surprised. I was sort of expecting it must be half the price of a new light fitting kind of conversation, and it was much more open than that and much more collaborative than that. And then the general view held was actually, if it isn't more expensive, we would consider it. And I think that's when you then start to look at actually, can Graeme and his team find a way to incentivize this activity? And of course, yeah, in the end, money talks, isn't it? But it'd be great to have a policy in which you say, actually, if you adopt this, you're going to get some credits, you're going to get some rebate on something, I don't know, but anything that drives it in this direction can only be a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. We've got two questions on similar lines. One's from Sophie Parry, and she says, when refurbishing luminaires from, say, fluorescent to LED, how does the contractor get a lighting design as part of the deliverable to ensure that the remanufactured luminaires are compliantly light the space to the current standard? So I think she's talking about point for point. And Jim Shrove says, how difficult is it to ensure that the original distribution of the luminaires matched when switching to fluorescent to LED? So along the same lines, Glenn, that's one for you. If you turn your microphone on.
Sorry. Okay, yeah, so on Sophie's point, yeah, very, very good point to raise. Yes, absolutely is the answer. A lighting scheme can be and should be provided when we're upgraded or remanufacturing, refurbing fittings from fluorescent to LED. Us ourselves, we have in-house photometry, and we're assessed by the LIA regularly on that. So we can provide, through the Regen Initiative, we can provide Simon and the guys there with the LDT files, and they can do a full lighting scheme, which shows the validity of the new product going in. Alternatively, we can provide that LDT file to others if a consultant wants to do the lighting scheme, or someone else. In terms of the, I think the question from Jim was along the distribution of how can we ensure the distribution. I think, not being a lighting designer, I might have to defer on that one and pass that over to one of my colleagues, maybe Simon, for that answer. I don't want to give any false information. So
yeah, so I sort of touched on the slides around sort of simulating through the design process and the engineering process of the parts that we're going to remanufacture. Then we can simulate photometric performance using where possible Zaga boards and stuff, so that we're actually aligning ourselves to Zaga as well, and so we can simulate that, physically make prototypes, physically test those prototypes, and then validate those prototypes in a lighting design. So whilst we might not be able to completely replicate what was there with fluorescent, we'll be able to demonstrate what the result afterwards would be, and certainly make sure that they're in line, for instance, with 12464 if you're looking at office environments and glare compliance and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Nigel, if I could bring you in here, one of the elements you talked about was about the contractor being a key element in taking these luminaires out, and I know in Glenn's case, the contractor picked up the phone and all the rest of it. But how do you incentivize? Do contractors have to be paid per luminaire to take them out? How is that going to work?
It's a really good question. In fact, I'll be talking to Paul Reeve at the ECA about this issue to try to find how we can really make it work, because undoubtedly it will contractors in more time and effort. It's much easier to drag something out very quickly and drop it on the floor than it is to carefully remove it, wrap it in cardboard bubble wrap, and make sure it's still in good condition. So exactly how that encouragement works is still for discussion. And again, I'd love anyone on the on this webinar who has some views on how that might work. Please do get in contact with us, because that's one of the issues on which it will stand or fall. If they're all damaged as the good quality product gets taken out of the ceiling, then we lose before we start. Critical.
Glenn, can we bring you in on this? How do you incentivize a contractor to take out a fitting with care and love, rather than just ripping it out? Just you want to put your mic on, I think.
Yes, it's difficult. I mean, the example that I gave earlier in the presentation about an OEM who had supplied a Cat A fit out, lovely lines of nearly 400 products. The contractor has said that I'll take them out and you can come and collect them. So what we don't know is how that's realised. The contractor's taking them down and doing what with them. So already the OEM is foreseeing that these fittings are going to be scratched in some way, and they've asked us to look at how do we refurbish them in terms of removing transit scratches really from ceiling back to the OEM or back to us. So it is a tricky one. I think when we start on the journey with the contractor or whoever it might be, we talk to them about getting these fittings back and how we can do that properly and carefully. I think if these people are generally interested in getting these fittings back for the right reasons and being part of this circular economy, I don't think that the initial thought will be, I mean, if they're them thoughts, I don't think they're going to take fittings down and just dump them on the floor. I think they will be, handled carefully. And I think it's a conversation to have at the time when we engage with these people. There's a conversation to be had at the time on how we do it. Maybe when we go to collect them, we can assist them with wrapping them back up. We can ask them to put some basic packaging around them. Clearly, they're not going to have any boxes on site. Maybe we can send something in advance so they can do that as they're taking them down. So a conversation to be had, I think, but there will be ways around it.
But do you think, can you, my point is, Glenn, can you see a financial incentive for contractors to take, you know, so much a payment per luminaire or something? So they make that phone call. So they make that phone call to you at the start.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on some of the projects we get right now. The contractor is making the call to us. The majority of the time, it's the OEM making the call to us, and that's how we like to engage with people, through the OEM. So maybe that conversation has been had there. But the truth is, right now, Ray, I'm not sure of the answer to that. This is all new to a lot of people, and I think through discussions like this and through other forums, then we can come up with something maybe that does incentivize people to get these back and make it commercially viable for them.
Mm-hmm. Donald Kennedy is asking, following on the discussion on situational commercial viability, does anyone have an idea of the potential scale of the lighting remanufacturing industry? Tom, you asked this question. Do you want to answer that question? Do you see a lot of new players coming in?
Yeah, well, I do, to be honest. I think so. Three kind of models. Excuse me, three models to put in front of you. So independent remanufacturer, kind of closer to what we're doing, Coco and FMark with the Regen, you know, where it's a third party prospectively remanufacturing, or either to give to a new client or back to the same site, or contracted remanufacture, where there's explicit agreement, terms of agreement, and maybe even quality guidelines agreed with a manufacturer, where the manufacturer might find that they actually, you know, don't want to or aren't well placed to do remanufacture alongside their remanufacture processes. I know in other industries, particularly automotive, that's quite a common arrangement. And then there's obviously the case where just the remanufacturer takes on remanufacture as well. And I think we're going to see a bit of a sporadic move in probably all of those directions. Not going to start making any grand predictions, but just to revisit those numbers that I put up, you know, in automotive in Europe, 2,300 firms in this space, electronic and electrical 2,500, aerospace 1,000, medical equipment 60, and that's moving very quickly at the moment. So I think we're going to see an increase, and hopefully we can kind of work on a way that that every stakeholder in the industry is kind of taken along with this.
And I think this is going to be this is small scale, right? So if you look at European lighting industry, you know, it's pre-COVID anyway, was a 15 billion euro, you know, lighting fixture business. You know, the UK, if we're going to make it UK centric, that's about 10% of that. So if, you know, we go and get 1% of that market, then we're creating, you know, 14 million pounds worth of remanufactured goods. You know, that will be 1% of the total kind of, you know, European market. So it's, sorry, the total UK market alone. So 0.1% of new light fixtures, you know, in the European marketplace. So it will be, you know, and I would imagine, I'm not going to speak for Tom, but I would imagine that if you know, get a chunk of 14 million euros, you know, through the Regen Initiative, you know, that we would be delighted, you know, and that would be a win, right? Or despite the fact that will be more fixtures than we can probably handle on a monthly basis. So that'll be a nice problem to have. But I think it will grow. It has to expand. It's nice to be able to give the opportunity for this to grow. And that's what the initiative is. And it's just one last point I'd like to make was that this isn't instead of approaching OEM. So one of the feasibility elements was actually 95% of the light fittings are with OEM A. So why don't we engage with OEM A to make sure that, to give them the opportunity to do this piece of work first? And that's probably the most sensible route, you know, when you look at it on a project by project basis.
Nigel, if I can invite you to wrap up for us. It seems like we're at the foothills of a new sort of era in the lighting industry, and new models and new ways of doing things. Is that your feeling?
It is, absolutely. It's something that we've got to do, because there is an absolute environmental imperative to actually reusing more and reducing the amount of resource we used in production of new product. But at the same time, it's very exciting, I think, for the organisations that are willing to take the opportunity. This is a really great chance to get in at an early stage and create new markets. And it's not often that you actually see a really interesting opportunity of a new market, and to be there in the foothills, as you put it. Egg and cocoa are there already. I think there's space for a number of others, and we'd love to see growth in this new market.
Okay, all right.
Just to conclude, in that case, I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody on the panel, and thank you, Ray, for chairing. Really appreciated. It's been another fantastic range of discussions and really thought-provoking. I think we've really moved over the webinars that we've had last year and this year from here's what we could do to here's what we are doing, and that's really, really fantastic. So thank you to our participants and our panelists.
Yeah, it is remarkable. We actually have the things we're talking about now would have been unthinkable a couple of years ago before the pandemic. Absolutely. This has been recorded, and you will get a link to recording, and you can go to the recolight.co.uk events page and then follow the links, and you can go through this and see the recording, and you should get a link. Anybody who's registered will get a link to that. On the Thursday, the 28th of October, we have Designing Sustainable Luminaires, which will obviously incorporate a lot of the stuff we've talked about today, but it's more of interest to manufacturers. How can we make luminaires that tick all the boxes and can be reused at the end of life? So that is that. Make sure you register for that, which will be a fascinating discussion as well. And it only remains for me to thank Graeme, Tom, Simon, Nigel, Francesca, Glenn and Tony, and behind the scenes, Suzanne, for helping with all the logistics and everything today. We'll see you all back on the Thursday the 28th. Thank you.